Welcome to the ninth episode of the Right Cast. We are back to back to back to back. And today we're going to be talking about passion versus money because you cannot have both. It's impossible, as you will discover in this episode. But no, we want to know, should an artist write, for the art, for the sake of the craft, and just because you love the craft? And should that be the sole or primary reason for your creations, or should it be motivated by money? That's something we're going to discuss because whilst I think I could probably guess where most people, especially a lot of creative types of people, would fall in this conversation, I do think it's worth considering from both sides how people might view it, and just in a more pragmatic sense, how you maybe would want to view it as a storyteller in the modern day. And Anthony very helpfully has got some very interesting stats that I think a lot of you are going to want to hear, especially if you are an aspiring author.
Very depressing stats.
Yes. So, but realistic and necessary. So for that reason, I'm going to ask you, Anthony, what is, not your stats, but what is your take on this topic?
So my take is, if you know someone famous, if you are related to a book agent, or you have a bunch of money you're willing to throw away before you see a profit, then yeah, you can write for money and probably make your money back eventually. Even if you have one of those three things, though, statistically, the odds aren't very good for you. So if you're going to become a writer, do it for passion and not just because of the money, but because the writing lifestyle. Basically, you either have to be a hermit or insane if you want to be an effective author.
That makes sense. I can mostly agree with that. I definitely would say that you're going to probably want to err on the side of passion, and not just in writing, but in most things. But especially because of something like writing, it takes a long time for most people, especially people who are new, and if you're not as experienced in it. And for you to commit yourself to something and to actually follow through and make something that can make you money is usually going to take you a lot of time and if energy and effort. And I'm talking about if you're making something, not if you pay someone to make something for you. That's not what we're talking about. So if you sit down and you are going to create the art yourself, you're going to make the stories, you're going to need to have some level of passion. And I guess you could have a passion for money to drive you all the way through. I guess that could work. But I'm going to be honest, if you have a passion for money, there are way more lucrative things that you could apply that passion to than writing a book, especially considering most people are not going to be able to pump out, dozens of books in a short span of time. And, from what I've seen, looking at self-publishing in particular, typically the sort of traditional publishing model of releasing one book a year or one book every few years or whatever, that doesn't tend to work as well for you financially as it does in the traditional publishing world. And even in traditional publishing world, most people doing that ain't making tons and tons of money, but they're definitely usually doing better than the self-publisher who does that. And so usually what I've seen when people are making good money from making their own stuff, usually it comes down to they release things very fast and they're very good at releasing, or they'll have like a trilogy and they've already written it and they release like one book in a trilogy every few months. I can tell you right now, I can't do that. Not just because of the simple fact of my actual writing speed doesn't really accommodate for it, but even if I sat down and spent like 2-3 years just writing out books so that I could release them, and I considered doing it before, it's not my style, I guess. It's not how when I think of making stories, I definitely have more of the mindset of the traditional author, which is the reason why, my approach to trying to create a brand and all of that is a little different than what would be typical. Because I know that the way how I want to write my stories does not work well financially wise with my actual method of publishing. Anyway, so basically that's just to kind of put out the idea of how realistically the way you approach things and your strategy, these are the types of things you do have to think about. Because when you're asking the question of, should I just write for money or should I do it for passion? Again, like I said, I think a lot of people will default to the passion thing, but you might start finding yourself in situations where maybe it's struggling, or maybe you put things out there and you're not getting what you expected. And then all of a sudden, money starts seeming quite important, doesn't it? As soon as you, for a lot of people anyway, I would say, when they put something out and they thought it'll make money and then it doesn't. But anyway, speaking of putting something out and it not making money, Anthony, would you like to present the amazing stats that will definitely brighten everyone's day?
There is something you said that was wrong in that statement. We'll see what that was here in a second. But I am very much a numbers guy. I am a writer by nature, but I have a brain of a businessman. And so for me, I am very fascinated by stats. I'm very fascinated by the industry as a whole in terms of books. And so I like to keep up with the reports every year as much as I can, as much as is publicly available. What books sell on average? What's the success rate of authors? And last year, we got some very, very, very detailed stats because of some lawsuits that were going on where several big house publishers were trying to merge in the United States and actually got blocked.
Yeah.
But there are some detailed reports that came out during that lawsuit. And so if you see me looking over here, I am looking at the official report that came out. The breakdown of new books, so printed for the very first time and over a year, how many copies they sold. And so here's the breakdown. This is from a sample of 50,000 books, new books that were printed and sold directly at retail locations in the United States. That's stores like Barnes & Noble, that's your local grocery store, stuff like that. Yeah. So of the 50,000, 15% sold under 10 copies. 15% of new books sold under 10 copies for the entire year. Huh. If you go to 1,000 copies, that makes up 52%. Now, for most big publishers, their break-even point is 5,000 copies. They need to sell 5,000 copies of a book or to make back everything that they invested in the author, the advance check, the marketing costs, all that. And another 21.5% failed to hit 5,000 copies. So that's all the numbers that I threw out. So I'm going to make it real simple as I can. 90% of the new books that were released in retail locations last year, 90% of the new books sold less than 5,000 copies. Sold less than what they needed to break even for the big publishing houses. So when people say that it's the 10% of books that are keeping the publishing houses afloat, they're absolutely right. We got the numbers last year. And again, 90% of the new books just will not break even.
Mm-hmm. So that's like a really, really interesting stat and very sobering, I guess, because, and what I really like about it is that it's traditional publishing, because I don't know how prevalent it is still, but I think still amongst a lot of writers today, there's still the idea that the traditional publisher, if you get with them, you're guaranteed to just be this hyper successful author. You're going to be on the shelves. And I think people, for some reason, they mistake the idea of being available in a bookstore as somehow translating to financial success. Like, well, if my book's in the store, people are definitely picking it up. It's definitely going to be successful. It's definitely, doing big numbers. And obviously that is just not true. So as those stats prove. And to be honest, if you had just listened to authors over the years and you listen to what they would say themselves, you'd realize that that's not really true anyway. And of course, self-publishing, most people ain't going to necessarily make money as well. But it's just more interesting to me because the publisher is already taking some of a percentage from you and all that kind of stuff, because they're doing it under the guise of, yes, well, we're going to push you out there. And it's like, well, you do all of that and it still doesn't work. And the funny part about this is, of course, before even that point, when they are looking for books, they're looking for works on the basis of what they think is going to sell. So clearly, whatever they think is going to sell is not working. I don't actually know in depth enough about exactly what's going on there, but I don't know, because obviously that's all books. That's not just like any one specific genre. I'm not sure if there is numbers by genre or not. Maybe there is, but I think it'd be very interesting because I wonder if there's some genres that I just kind of would imagine maybe are harder to sell in this day and age than
Mhm.
others. But like I know romance books, whether you're publishing traditionally or self-publishing, tend to just do well a lot of the time, or can do very, very well. I know a lot of YA books can do very, very well. I mean, we know this because a lot of times a YA book will get an adaptation if it does very well, so we know that. So I think that they can do quite well, but they, some books, depending on what it is, like if it's some historical fiction that's really like specific and stuff like that about a time period most people don't care about or something, I don't know, it might be a lot harder to sell it. But it just goes back to, again, to the main topic, which is passion or money. In a situation like that, I mean, it's a funny thing because the publisher, whilst I'm sure a lot of the people might have passion for the craft and for stories and for books, at the end of the day, they're going to want returns and stuff like that. So for them, that money is going to matter because ultimately, if the passion part doesn't, like, let's say you could have someone who has no passion for any of the works or whatever, but if they think it's going to make money, they'll be satisfied. And overall, the publishing house will be satisfied. So unfortunately, passion doesn't pay the bills, right? So that's just the realistic part of it. But how would you say, Anthony, like you interpret those numbers for yourself? Because for me, I just think it's interesting that it kind of shines a light on how traditional publishing isn't guaranteed success
Yep.
as like people think.
And that was the thing for me where of all the books I've written, I did 2 books traditionally published. And I will say this, the books that I traditionally published, the 2 that I did, they did sell better initially than the books that I self-published. All the marketing efforts, sticking them in bookstores and all that, it did help. Mm-hmm. The problem is, and this is a huge reason why I only self-publish now, is that the cut that the publishers were taking for selling my books was way too much. So even though the 2 books that I traditionally publish are some of the books I've sold the most of, they are actually the least profitable books that I have released. Because I'll just give some raw numbers. The first book that I did traditionally publish, I got 10 cents a copy that was sold. The next one, I got a slight raise to 15 cents. When I self-publish a book for $3.99, I get $3. And this is versus a traditional published book, which was usually $9 to $15 it was being sold at retail for, and I got to see 10 to 15 cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's another thing as well, is that something I've noticed is you've got way more self-published authors. And it's funny because it's kind of turning into self-publishing versus traditional thing. But it's funny because a lot of the self-published authors that I've if they really work at it, they can push themselves in, and there's strategies they can employ to try and make a certain amount, or to try and make a high earning out of it. And because they have control, they can dictate that. If they don't like something, or if they notice something's not working marketing wise, they can like fix those things. Whereas in traditional, you're kind of just, I mean, I don't know because I've not been traditionally published and I don't know how it works today. And I would assume it's going to depend on the publisher. But it seems, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really down to them. So, if especially things like your book cover and how they want to market it and stuff like that, you can't really, if you look at their marketing strategy and you think that's not great, I guess you could give suggestions, but it's really at their discretion if they're going to listen or not. Whereas if it's in your hands, yeah, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but for better or worse, it's all in your hands. But at least you have that ability. So I would definitely say if you fall on the side of being for money, I would say it's probably a better bet for you to go into self-publishing, especially because I would assume the person who's more of a money-driven artist is probably going to be a lot more business-oriented anyway, which means you're probably going to have the skills and the mindset required to actually make something successful with self-publishing. Like when this is the thing about me, I'm a very pragmatic person, but I noticed that when it comes to something like writing or storytelling, I don't really like to employ the business mentality too. See, because I have it, but when it comes to like writing, I struggle to, like, I can't go as heavy with it. I can't do it. I've tried before, but I just can't do it. And when I've sat there and listened to podcasts and stuff about self-publishing. I love everything I'm hearing. I completely vibe with it. But then, like in practice, if I was to try to do a lot of things they're doing, it's just not in my soul to do it. Like I have to, if I write one book, I cannot just the next month I'm putting out the next one because I care too much about each one being like its own, thing. I guess this kind of goes back to, in a sense, what we were saying in the last episode about like the diegetic thing. Because I think to an extent, because that's more of how my style is of narrative, that's probably part of the reason why as well. Why I don't feel so much like on the I need to too much on the business oriented side, I guess, if that makes sense. I think that is definitely probably the reason why.
And something else to consider, a lot of these very successful self-published authors get picked up by the traditional publishing houses. And when the traditional publishing houses approach them, they are approaching them with a much better contract than what you would get if you are coming to them without any success behind you.
Yeah. That's another big thing as well, is that it's like, that's like The Martian, for example, like, which is probably the most famous, one of the most famous examples of that happening, where it's like, oh look, self-published, and then we'll take that, and then and we'll get a movie, throw Matt Damon in, which I think that's just a crazy example of something like that. It's always made me wonder as well, like, because I've heard typically the rule is like once you self-publish something that you shouldn't like, that's it, unless it is super successful. Like a publisher is not going to be interested unless it was just a big hit. I'm pretty sure that's what the general rule with that is.
That's the general rule. The reason is that people use it as an excuse of, well, you already got your book out there, you already tried to make your footprint. If they didn't care about it then, why would they care about it now? It does depend on the agent. I know there are some great agents out there who are like, we don't care if you've ever self-published your book. In fact, even if you get a couple reviews, if the reviews say that they're great, then we're more interested. But it does vary by the agent. And I do think it probably does depend on some marketing houses as well, where it makes the big publishing houses a bit nervous because they don't want to have someone Google search it and then somehow find your old copy and then get it that way when they're trying to sell a brand new copy of the story.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing I've always heard, is that they basically don't want people to either find a story somewhere or whatever. But it's funny though, because there's like stories that have been like originally started out on like fan fiction or whatever, like fanfiction.net, and was like posted on there. Obviously it would have changed, but it's funny how there were stories that were like originally on certain websites that people read from start to finish and then they got published anyway. So it's kind of funny how that works. But yeah, I would definitely say that in regards to the topic, for me, I've always what I think a lot of people basically need to think about, especially in regards to those stats, like we've already said, when it comes to certain things, there's a lot of romanticism and a lot of idealism and just kind of fantasies that people have in their head about how artistic and creative mediums work, especially to do with writing. And I think I've brought this up before, but I think with writing in particular, people romanticize a lot of elements of it. And I think if you are like most artistic people probably are, as I've said, going to go into it with the creative, artistic, writing from the heart type of thing, which I think is personally for me, that is how I would do it, is for passion. But I think you still need to be pragmatic and realistic about what your outcomes will be, whether you're doing self-publishing or traditional, hybrid, whatever you're going for. You need to be realistic, because I think the thing that's going to dampen your passion the fastest is you having unrealistic expectations and then thinking, yeah, I'm going to be an instant bestseller. And who knows, maybe you will. But the thing is there's no guarantees. A lot of those people that you're talking about, like the 90%, I'm sure a lot of them would think, yeah, I'm sure hopefully I'll sell over 5,000, you know what I mean? But then, and yeah, you can hope for the best, but you should just be prepared to recognize that, yeah, it's even though I will say there's probably context behind, like I said, like even down to like the genres and stuff, there's probably something behind why so many of them are not, because I don't think anything's entirely a coincidence. So I think there's probably something behind why a lot of those books aren't selling. And from what I've heard from some authors, sometimes with some of the traditional publishing houses, they're not pushing their book as much as they thought they would push it, and things like that. So, which I think is crazy, but I mean, I don't know how you're going to take a percentage and not, that don't make no sense. But it happens, I guess. So, but yeah, in terms of just the topic of like passion, specifically that side of it, again, I think a lot of people default to that. But would you say that is there ever a way of being a writer where you're just purely for money, where you think that works like well as a writer specifically? Like you're just like, I want to make a lot of money and I'm going to be a writer. What would you say is like a way to approach that if someone did want to do that?
So if you are serious about becoming an author and writing for the money, as in this is what you want to dedicate yourself for the rest of your life, this is what you want your career to be, you want to get to the point where you write books for money, I think there is a pathway to get that success. Now, you have to do several things. First off, I think it's very important to listen to podcasts and talk to published authors and learn from them, find out how they became successful. Two, I think you have to be aware that certain genres, like you said, sell better.
Yeah.
And again, you might have to compromise. You might not be able to write the things or tell the stories that you want to tell if you are very serious about making money. Something else to be aware of is that at the end of the day, it is a bit of a dice roll where there are some fantastic books that win Pulitzer Prizes that still just go unsold because people aren't interested.
Yeah.
And so my personal advice would be maybe take a year or two and try to do everything right. Try to do everything you can to be successful. But my personal advice would be make writing a side gig. Treat it like growing a YouTube channel or any other creative endeavor that, yeah, your dream would be to make it your main focus one day. But because of how risky it is, don't devote yourself to something and find out a couple of years later that it doesn't make the money that you wanted. And now you're stuck in a hole.
Yeah. I'd say that's very sensible advice, especially understanding those those 2 points you made about firstly, like, to do with the fact you need to definitely think about what genre, okay? Because like, and this is really, again, I'm applying it mostly to writing, but this really does apply, I would say, to any creative endeavor. If you're doing something and you're like, I want to make money, I want to, definitely make this as a living, you need to really think about being strategic. And what you said as well, actually, the first bit of advice as well, of like talking to different authors and people who are successful, that one is definitely big because it's going to help you to actually understand how people already achieve success so that you don't just walk into things blind. But you've got to be realistic. And if you're looking at certain genres, you're like, man, I don't want to write this, I don't want to do this. And if it's all the genres that tend to make money, you're probably going to struggle if you just want to write some obscure stuff. Again, I don't know, sometimes niching down works, but realistically, it just depends on what you're doing. And I think if you're driven mostly by trying to be financially successful, then you should be more willing to just be like, yeah, okay, I'll compromise. Because I don't think those people, I'm thinking of people who the money is the end goal. Like, not so much like they care about making a story of some depth and meaning, and they're not bothered about that. They're just like, I just want to make money, and I feel like writing is my vehicle. I don't know why, but I'm just trying to. I don't know why I feel like there's so much other things you could do, but I'm just gonna say, like, if that is for some reason the thing you're going for, yeah, that's definitely a good way. You definitely have to think about those things. And that, for me, what you said about the thing, people could win a prize, like you can get awards and the book's still not selling like that well. That is something that I noticed a few years ago. That for me was just like, wow, something can have acclaim, critical acclaim and stuff, and still just not really be doing numbers. And then you've got conversely something that everyone knows about, sells amazingly, and doesn't necessarily have any awards. So, which one would you prefer? And I think that in and of itself is actually something that's worth asking yourself, because that'll probably tell you more of where you're thinking. Like when someone says that to you, let's say you don't get the recognition from, the Oscars, right? Effectively, you don't get the Oscars recognition, but yeah, everyone knows you're a household name. I don't know. Like, I definitely know for me, and I feel like for most people, they would be fine with not getting the Oscars recognition. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like, whatever. Like, everyone still knows what my stuff is and knows about me. I think most people would be happy with that. But I don't know. Some people, they're just like, no, I want the recognition. There's actually one person I know I'm thinking of that I'm pretty sure they would prefer the recognition of something like the awards rather than just general people. Which for me personally, I can't do that. I care more about the general audience, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the awards are cool. The recognition is cool. It's just, I'm such a practical person. What do you do with an award?
Yeah.
Like, even a lot of these award winners, they don't get another opportunity because the companies are like, well, you wrote this amazing piece of work. People loved it, but didn't make us any money. So why are we going to do the same thing when your next work is probably not going to even be received as well?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, yeah. It's definitely, it's funny though, because obviously passion and art and creativity, especially when it comes to things like this and artistic mediums, it's a shame how much sometimes the money machine influences it, because it does sometimes lead to us having things be watered down, or things become a lot more superficial, and as a result of trying to chase the dollar, like it does happen. And so that is a massive like loss in a lot of ways creatively. What would you say is like, you think is like a good way to sort of, for someone who wants a more balanced approach, I guess, if they want to still make money and be successful, but they don't want to have to sacrifice their passion in order to achieve that? How realistic do you think that's going to be, or how would you say people would best go about doing that?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily believe that because you're trying to get a specific monetary goal and you're trying to cater to a broader audience, that's going to completely kill your creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can still make something very creative and be true to the story that you want to tell.
Yeah.
But be aware of the fact that things that make a lot of money usually have very broad appeal. It is very rare for something to be like objectively bad, but still make a ton of money. Like a movie example, even the Transformers movies, they did not get the best critic ratings, but there's a reason why those first few movies each made like $1 billion. And so I would approach it as in look at what's popular, find the elements that work for people, find the elements that make them popular, and then fuse them with the more goofier stuff, the more out there stuff, the more stuff that's unique to you. And I think that's how you can make something that people in general are going to love, but it'll still have enough of you in it that will make true fans of people, that will make them want to return and see the stuff that you make in the future too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. That's like how I approached with my first book, is like taking, which is a lot easier because it was meant to be some of a commentary on certain things. But I always say it's the most generic book I'll probably ever write, for the simple fact that it's like, yeah, I was thinking, how do I make it appealing to people, but at the same time, I'm trying to make it still my thing. So I do think that that's the best way to approach it, in a sense of, if you want to have somewhat of an appeal. Also, if you are just really niche with things, that can sometimes still be, because there's another thing as well. When we're talking about like monetary success, a massive factor also to think about is that that's not the same for everybody. So obviously, like when we're talking about like a publishing house or whatever, they've got their numbers. They're solid in what terms of what they want. You already said, we already know they're typically going to want about 5,000 copies sold. So we already can look at a hard number with them, because they're part of the machine. They have like a specific industry standard. But as an individual, there is no standard. You'll determine it for yourself. So because you'll determine it for yourself, it might be easier or harder to achieve success depending on what it is for you. So even if you are trying to do it for the passion and you want to make money at the same time, if your monetary goal is not very high, it's going to be easier for you to basically have both, because you're going to be like, okay, like let's say, like you were saying about how you'll sell your books, if you self-publish them and you can make $3, rather than what was it, 10 cents, did you say?
Yeah, 10 to 15 cents.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. So like rather than 10 or 15 cents, if you can make $3, so if you're only trying to, make, I don't know, $3,000, right, in a month, I mean, that's extremely, I think that's very, very plausible depending on your strategy, considering the fact there's people who make tens of thousands of dollars from their books in a month. So if you're saying, I just want 3,000, or even if it's less than that, some people might be less, like you might say, I just want to be able to pay for, like, replace my 9 to 5. And let's say if you're 9 to 5, you're making, 2,000, 2,500 a month. and you're like, I want to replace that. If you are able to make that, cool. The only issue, I guess, when it comes to things like this is being able to have a consistent income, and that's the thing. Like, and then you've also got to make other stuff, because from what I can tell, it seems like a lot of times people have to make more and more things, and they have to kind of keep the passion going, even after like years. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like they have to keep making different books.
Yeah.
Forgot what I was going to say.
Example I was going to bring up, and this is kind of a great reminder for everyone, is that even if you do get that first big success, the road isn't over. Again, Brandon Sanderson, we can't go too many episodes without bringing him up. His first successful book, like this was his first book that he got professionally published for a mass reading audience, was Elantris.
Yeah.
He sold 400 copies of Elantris in this first month. And his agent told him, that's great. That's pretty good compared to most of the new authors.
Mm-hmm.
And he was excited about that, and it helped him kickstart his career. He did not make a lot of money off of that book. He did not make a lot of money off of his next few books. He did not pass his wife, who was just a generic, ordinary school teacher, in income until 6 years after his first published novel. And this is Brandon Sanderson we're talking about, so he's releasing multiple books in a year most of the time. So that is just something to be aware of, is that there is money to be made. Like you look at a J.K. Rowling, you look at Andy Weir, who made The Martian, you look at Stephen King, George R. R. Martin, all these people. Yeah, the upper echelon, there's a ton of money if you reach that upper echelon. For the average author, though, there is money to be made, and you can make a sustainable income, but it's still not going to be that good compared to most other careers.
Yeah. That's what you get people who call like mid-list authors and stuff. Brandon, though, and authors like him, I think are a good example because of the fact that they did have to work their way up to a certain point. They didn't just come out the gate like that. I think the J.K. Rowling's of the world, what happens is people see that and they're like, oh, overnight success, instant. And so everyone rushes to wanting that. And again, because those authors usually it was a passion project, it leads you to thinking if you just have passion, you can be successful. But in those situations, there's a certain element of luck of the draw that's involved. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're at least somewhat being motivated by money, you're going to be more likely to make pragmatic decisions. That's going to maybe eventually end up with you maybe you won't have a J.K. Rowling situation, but maybe you'll be more like a Brandon, where over years of working and being pragmatic about things, eventually you could end up being quite successful. Because I think, whilst Brandon's still not at a J.K. Rowling level, I think really give him a few adaptations that are solid. I think his stuff could get to that point. Maybe I could be wrong, because to be truthfully honest, it depends on what stories they adapted. But because none of them are really Harry Potter. Harry Potter's just got too much appeal. It's got too much appeal. It's he'd have to make something like that. But I still think in his own way he could have a bigger name, and I think that's something for a lot of people to consider. Like, success doesn't always have to come at the same speed. And so if you are doing something for passion, your passion will keep you going, most likely in the times when it's tough and when you're not seeing the financial results. But depending on the approach you take, like if you take a self-publishing route, I really would say to not allow your devotion to your passion to overtake your pragmatism. Still think about things logically, because at the end of the day, I think for most people, I could be wrong, but I think for most people, their passion will dim if they are not getting anything out of it at some point. It's going to start making them feel, but I could be wrong. But, there are some people who don't care and they'll just keep going regardless. I'm the kind of person where I'll keep going because I do believe eventually I will get the reward I want. So that's why I will keep going. But I think if I got to a certain age and a certain point and it just seemed like nothing was I think I would slow down, or maybe even stop. But that's a sad thought. But I'm too realistic. I feel like at some point I'd be like, man, if it's not going to happen now, then when? But the funny thing is, even though I say that, reality is it could turn out at that time when I'm thinking I'm 60 years old, I'm like, I'm gonna quit now. I've been trying this since I was 17. I think it's time to stop. It could be that in the 61st year was actually, oh, that's the, that could have been the year. You never know. And I think that hope sometimes keeps people going. There's nothing wrong with that, really. Just don't throw yourself into some sort of depression or something over it, I guess, is really what I would say. But yeah, do you have any other comments, any final words you want to say about this topic? Because I feel like in a way, I don't know if it's like a downer of a topic or if it's a bit. I hope not.
My concluding thought is that a lot of people are very tempted, especially when you're chasing that money, to start off with a series. My personal advice is that don't really go into a series unless it's like, oh, I have to do this or else I'm not going to be creatively fulfilled in my life. My advice would be finish one project, make it as good as you can, and then go back and revise it and make it even better. And then just do your best to promote that one product, that one book, that one story, whatever it is you're making. And then if you can make some money off of it, if you can build an audience with that one and have people that are excited for the next one, then you should put your time into that next one. Because I think for a lot of people, they don't have time to multitask. So you don't have time to develop your next product when you have one already out there that you need to market. So make one, market, and if you make enough money, move on to the next one, unless you have a creative need and you need to write the next one.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, I would just say, right from the heart, guys. No, I mean, I remember once I made a video about this ages ago, and I'm going to try and remember what it was I said, because there was something I said in it that I think is probably a good message to give people, which is that for me personally, the reason why I would always somewhat encourage you to write for passion, even though I do think you need to still have some of a pragmatic approach, just in terms if you do want some sort of success, because again, regardless of what lane you take, and regardless of what industry you go into, pragmatism is always going to help you to actually be successful, especially in the moments when you're not being successful, if you need to have a course correction and adjust things. I would say the good thing though with the passion is that a lot of times there's sometimes people will do things that they wouldn't do otherwise because they want money and they want success and financial success. And people who are passionate, if they have a strong sense of artistic integrity, they won't do those things because it goes against their artistic integrity. Now, me, as someone who's got very high artistic integrity, there's a lot of things I will not do for money. And as a result of that, it may mean that the path to success for me is slower. But the way how I always view it is you will always have the fact that you basically did not sell out or go down a certain path. You'll always be able to hold on to that, and you'll always be able to have some measure of dignity. Now, I don't know, maybe to some people that doesn't matter, but for me it does. And for me, having self-respect matters. So I will always be able to at least have that, if nothing else. I think the worst thing is to chase money and to chase that and to still have nothing in the end. That's worse, especially if you did a whole bunch of stuff and you have nothing to show for it, and you went against everything you stood for and believed in, and you was like, I would never write this sci-fi space erotica fan fiction something like, you're like, I'd never do it, and then you do it and you're like, I just need that money, and you don't make money, or you're making even less money, or you're like, maybe you made some money for a little bit and then you quit your day job and now you're making nothing and now you're in a worse situation. Like, that's, for me, that was one of the reasons why I would never allow the money thing to overwhelm me and to chase it too hard, because there's always a possibility you end up with nothing. At the very least, with the way I've approached things right now, I at least have created maybe only one book, and maybe it's not made me tons of money at this particular point, but it's something I'm very, very proud of. I'm very happy with it. Like, I mean, hopefully nothing happens to me, but if for some reason I wasn't here tomorrow, I feel like there's something I've left in the world that no one can take away from me that I'm very happy with and proud of and satisfied with. Whereas if I made certain things just for money, I'm not sure I could say that. So for me, that's why I would say just passion is the thing I would say to always cling to, but still have a certain sense of pragmatism if being financially successful matters to you. If it doesn't, then you can basically just do what you want. But yeah, that's what my closing words would be for the topic.
I can agree
That's
with
it.
that.
All right. Well, guys, if you are enjoying the podcast, leave your comments below. Leave a like. Kind of went out of frame though when I did that, but leave your like and your comments below. And again, definitely your comments. I've always been like this on YouTube. I like comments. I like reading them. Okay, because at the end of the day, I like to see what people think, and I think that some of the discussions we'll have and some of the perspectives we'll share. I've said this in older episodes as well, but like I think some of them is things you're not always gonna have writers and storytellers and artists willing to discuss, or they might not discuss in the ways we'll do it. So definitely share your thoughts, because this is a place where you can share different ideas and you're not necessarily going to get sniped for it. Okay. So if you want to go in the comments and be like, I just care about money, I don't care about the art, cool. We're not going to get mad at you. All right. It is what it is. But that's it. So thanks for listening, guys. Up next will be the 10th episode. So not sure what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure it'll be great. It'll be great. Maybe. Probably not. No, I'm joking. It'll be amazing. So see you guys. Thanks for listening.
Ciao.
We're out.